So once again, welcome and good morning to Tigers and Teddies Live. My name is Gary Robinson. Delighted to have you join us today, wherever you may be in the world. And here she is, my partner in crime, I'm delighted to say, Dr. Suzanne Zeedyk. Hello, Suzanne. Good morning to you. Oh, I think we've got a little picture of you
There
frozen.
We go.
You're there.
Yes, here we are.
So
yes.
It's all these people soaking up our bandwidth. That's how popular it is this morning.
It is amazing what lockdown has actually helped all of us to do so creatively, and that you can connect like this. Most people had never done anything like this before March. So I think it's remarkable, Gary, that we are all here this morning on our last episode of this series.
Yeah, I'd like to say we're coordinated with a little bit of tangerine, a little bit of orange there going on.
There's a bit of match going on there. And Gary, you know, your bow ties have become a key part of this series. So Lily contacts me in the middle of the week often to ask, what bow tie will you have on? So it brings a real character to our summer.
So let's just remind everybody how this started. It's when we launched this a number of months ago now. Saber-toothed tigers and teddy bears, the Connected Baby Guide to Attachment. How's it going since we launched? I know you've got a few left on the shelf there, but I know that they've been flying off the shelf, haven't they, these?
They have. It's been a very busy summer for us. Pete has been busy getting those in the posts, and what it has said to us is that people really want this information, and the fact that this series came as one more way to disseminate information about connection and relationships, I think is really exciting, because I think everybody deserves to have this information.
And tell me I mean, I know why I'm excited about this morning, but why are you so particularly excited about this morning and the subject of rupture and repair?
I'm excited about this book. So this brand new book, The Power of Discord, was written by our two guests today, Claudia Gold and Ed Tronick. And if I just read some of the chapter titles from this book: Repair as Food for the Soul, Feeling Safe to Make a Mess, Finding Hope in Uncertainty. I think those are key questions to ask for the political conflicts that we have today, for the kind of care that our children need, for the kind of policies that we need to support that, for the kind of family support that we need. Lots of people don't quite realize that babies come into the world as active participants in relationships. And when you get that, it changes everything in your understanding. And Claudia and Ed have been some of the leaders in the globe to help us to really get that message. And I can't believe that they are here with us this morning at 5:30 in the morning for them in the United States. So I am grateful as well as excited.
Claudia Gold, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So 5:30, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, being an early riser. Whereabouts in the States are you joining us from this morning?
I'm in rural, all the way western Massachusetts on the border of New York State.
Oh, it sounds idyllic. Are you in rolling countryside? I'm trying to picture it in my head, sort of rolling countryside, lots of beautiful pictures going on.
Yes, exactly.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, Claudia. It really has. And Ed, good morning to you. Ed Tronick, it's good to see you. Where are you joining us from this morning, sir?
From Boston. I live right in the heart of the city. And there are no rolling hills, but I really like cement.
Cement, I love it. That's really good. Thank you so much. That's I think that's going to be the level of the humour for us this morning. So we've set the bar there, Ed. Thank you so much for it. Your book, as Suzanne mentioned, is out, and there's a brilliant and I think it's a well-used quote actually regarding the power of discord, which you have both co-authored. This profoundly wise look at how to foster connections, attachment, and resiliency explains why working through discord is the true key to better relationships. Claudia, if I could come to you first, what inspired you to co-author the book, if you like?
Well, I was actually had the unique privilege of Ed emailing me on a summer morning in 2017, just when I was beginning to think about, I had written 3 books, what was going to be my 4th book, to ask if I would co-author this book with him. So really the answer to your question is a little bit about how Ed and I came to work together, which is that I started out as a pediatrician, wanting to be on the front lines with families from early on, and recognizing that the kind of training I had in pediatrics was kind of siloed from this wealth of knowledge in developmental science, which I had the good fortune to discover and then begin to use in my practice, and see how when kids were struggling and families were struggling, it's when they moved from misunderstanding to understanding in the kind of space I created in my office for listening, rather than jumping right to what is it and what to do. And I began to write about it because I wanted to share it with my colleagues and with the world. And then I joined Ed's fellowship in infant parent mental health, which, as I said, is generally siloed from pediatric training. And then the world kind of opened up to me, and I was a fellow, and then I joined the faculty, and continued to work very closely with Ed while I continued to do my clinical work. And the book is really a product of that collaboration.
And you're both leaders in your field. Claudia, you've been a pediatrician, and Ed, a developmental psychologist. Ed, if I could maybe ask the same question to you, since you sent the email to Claudia a few years ago. What motivated you to write this book, and why was Claudia the perfect co-author for you?
Well, Claudia was we don't, Claudia and I don't use the word perfect. We probably prefer the Winnicott phrase like good enough, and the good enough person is the one who really can be perfect. And she was perfect because, in part, because I really knew her and we had a connection together because of the work that we had done together in the Infant Mental Health Fellowship. She was a fellow, and then she was a faculty member in the program. I really liked her writing, and I liked the way she was thinking about infants and development and children and parenting. And I felt I wanted to get out some of these ideas. I think it's a little, it relates to Suzanne's idea of wanting to take the information that I had been working with for so many years and trying to make it more accessible to the public. And I knew my writing in scientific journals was not the style that would really get that across to people. And Claudia had really overcome that sort of issue. As a pediatrician, she was really working with families and individuals. And I think the way I came to it was when I was in graduate school. I was at the University of Wisconsin, and I worked in Harlow's laboratory, and he was doing the studies of monkeys. So we all know in monkeys raised on surrogates, and the effects of being raised, for example, on a wire surrogate, leading to really distorted development in an infant monkey. And the question I came up with, in part also influenced by John Bowlby's work, was how can we look at relationships and understand what makes for a good enough relationship? What makes for good enough parenting that really fosters development? And how can we examine it? And once I got involved in, once I started working on that question, I guess I've been pretty much stuck there ever since.
I think there's lots of great topics under the umbrella that we can discuss this morning, and it is a great honor to have you both, Ed and Claudia. Suzanne, if I could come back to you for a second. You know, there are people on this viewing this, and of course we record it for viewing later on. So there'll be some people who are very well aware of what rupture and repair is, and there's some people who'll be brand new to it. And it's a big part of the work that you do, Suzanne, here in the UK. But for those who aren't aware of rupture and repair, what is it?
The best example that I use to help people to get it, Gary, is the film Inside Out from Pixar and Disney. And there will be some people here this morning who have heard me talk about that. And there may be people here who've seen it, but haven't heard me talk about it. And there may be people here who have never seen that film. So here's a piece of homework in this last episode in the series. If you have not seen Inside Out, you need to do that before the autumn is done. Because at the center of that story of an 11-year-old girl who gets moved across the country when she never asked to go, thank you very much, mom and dad, she struggles with the loss of her friends and the loss of home. And the point of that film is that her parents don't see that she's struggling. And her new teacher doesn't see that she's struggling. And because no one can help her with that difficulty, with what is a rupture, she has to close down. And the resolution of that movie is that when her parents finally get it, when they finally understand that she's feeling sad and grieving rather than happy about all the opportunity, they can hear her. And the family comes back together again. And there's this scene at that moment where the whole family cuddles in together. And that's a repair. And the point of the rupture repair cycle, and that Ed and Claudia are trying to help us to understand in this book, is that ruptures are okay. Healthy relationships need conflict and tension. The difficulty in relationships is not when it gets tough. Long-term difficulty comes if you can't get back to repair, if you don't know how to make up. And I think it's a huge relief for everyone to hear that message. It's okay to have difficulty. What you need is to be able to make up, and that's where to focus your efforts. And I just find that it helps people to relax. Mm-hmm. So to understand the science of that is part of what Ed and Claudia help us to do. And then to think about all the applications like the political conflict we have at the moment, like the social difficulties we're having, like policies in childcare settings, like support for families, and all the way down to mobile phones. So all of those are places where we can see rupture, and what we need to focus on is repair.
Ed, I'm really interested in this, and I'm thinking, I do a lot of work with businesses, and I've got a few questions I'd like to ask, but I'm thinking about personal relationships at the moment, Ed, and when we have a close relationship, maybe it's a family relationship, somebody, or a close friend, and inevitably from time to time we fall out, we have disagreements. And I tend to think that, the issue why we don't say sorry or put our hands up and say we've made a mistake is somebody being bloody-minded or being stubborn. But I think what Suzanne is saying there, it's much deeper than that, and it's probably more of a biological issue. Would that be right, Ed? Is that what Suzanne's saying?
The term that I use is psychobiological, like psychological and biological wedded into a single term. And what we've come to understand is this interplay of our engagements with other people have really powerful effects on our physiology, how excited we get, how aroused we get, how we're able to control our cardiac responses. It used to be, certainly when I was trained, that there was the soft side of psychology and then there was the hard side of physiology. Well, that distinction has really broken down. So that when you're able to repair, the example that Suzanne gives is that it has really powerful consequences, both psychologically and biologically. And in your example, Suzanne, if I may just disagree a little bit, the repair in the movie is not their cuddling together at the end. Okay. That's the consequence. That's what comes out of repairs. when the repair is the struggle to get over the stubbornness, to hear the other person, to listen and respond to them, to try and repair and change what's going on. And when you're successful in that, the feeling you get is that you now feel connected to this other person. And in the movie, what's happening is the whole family in the repair or the consequence of the repair comes together and feels this sense of connection. And it's really wonderful. And it grows out of the process that they've gone through, which, as you say, Garrett, can be a real struggle, and it can be both frightening and disorganizing. But when you succeed, you not only feel good about yourself, but you really feel good about this other person.
And Claudia, if I could come to you, Ed used a really interesting word, which we will hear a few times, I'm sure, and it is that word listening. How important is listening in this whole aspect of rupture and repair?
It's critically important, and listening is something that's simple but far from easy. And I think of it as really protecting time and space for you. Also use the word curiosity, like to be able to say, I don't know what's going on. And it's often parents will come to say, well, my baby is fussy or won't sleep, tell me what to do, or won't listen. That's the classic one. So, Joey won't listen, tell me what to do to make him listen. And it's in kind of opening up that space. Well, what is it about what's going on? Tell me the story, and how are we going to make sense of this behavior? And in opening up that listening space, the behavior problem itself often evaporates as families move from this mismatch to repair, or misunderstanding to understanding. And you see these beautiful moments of growth. And I just had this beautiful vignette from just yesterday. I had a Zoom visit with a family I've been seeing since the baby was 4 months old and is now 6 months old. And there's a tremendous amount of anxiety, and they feel that the baby is frenetic, and so we were able to kind of watch in real time as the baby got a little bit disorganized and kind of talk about what was going on. And as they were able to calm down and reflect on what was going on for him, he lay on his belly and he propped himself up and he gave this enormous smile. So it really shows you that it's about the repair really leads to growth. And you literally saw the growth of this baby in real time as the whole family connected that way.
And Ed, a lot of that, of what Claudia has just said, seems to be reflected in the work that you did, back in 1972, the still face paradigm. So the work that you discovered, and I've seen the video during my research on this, and I know that Suzanne uses great examples of your work. A lot of it from what you discovered in 72 seems to be completely relevant now. Would that be correct? Or has it changed?
I think my thinking about it, in a sense, has evolved and changed. But the fundamental aspect of it, assuming most of your listeners know about it, but just briefly, is what I designed was a study in which the mother is playing face to face with an infant or with an older child, and then I simply asked the mother to stop interacting with the infant. And what I wanted to see was something that Suzanne referred to. Was I wanted to show that the infants were active in the interaction and that they were reading the emotion, that they were listening, to choose a word, to what their mothers were doing. And in listening, they were then responding in their own terms, that they had their own agency. And when we stopped the mother from interacting with the infant, there was this immediate effect on the infant. The infants, for one, a 4-month-old detects it within seconds, if not even faster than that. And they look a little bit perplexed, and they reach out and they may smile at the parent and they try to get the mother to respond, or if it's the father, to get the father to respond. And when the parent fails to respond to them, what you begin to see is that the infant turns away, withdraws, takes on a posture that many of the infants take on a way of looking that sort of is like shame. Their head ducks down, their hands are pulled up against their chest, as if they feel responsible for what's going on. But then when the mother resumes her interaction, there's this period of sort of renegotiation, what might be thought of as a repair of the freezing on the part of the mother. But very quickly, they get back together again. And when I first did it, the most important thing to me was the still face effect, because it showed how critical being connected with another person was for an infant, and how powerful those effects were. It generated all sorts of emotions, including this really stressful kind of state. And you asked before about psychobiology. You know, we see biological changes in the infants. They show, after a still face episode, they show higher levels of cortisol. During it, their cardiac response, their heart rate changes. But in part, in the work with Claudia, what I've come to see, but I think other people were seeing it as well, is that the reunion marks a really critical event. And in some sense, I've become almost more focused on it than just on the still face, because what the stress, you can overcome the rupture, and that the infant is able to do that. And Claudia talks about that the reunion episode sort of carries a sense of hope. We can do better. We can overcome this. So what was a very simple, and I might say even simple-minded idea to test whether infants were active in the interaction has become something conceptually much larger than it was.
And can I come in there, Gary, just for a moment?
Absolutely.
If you're watching today and you've never seen a still face paradigm, when you get done, you can just Google for that. So Ed's illustration of a still face paradigm is very well watched on Google. There's one of me also. Lots of you will have seen me showing one with dads at events that you have been to maybe with me. But I want to really emphasize something that I think makes us uncomfortable and should make us uncomfortable. Babies experience that all the time in real life. Okay, which is why understanding the importance of repair is important in thinking about the still face, because I have watched in the chat, and I hear all the time in audiences, that people go, that is really uncomfortable to see. Sometimes people say, is that ethical? Should we put children through a still face? And I always point out, children are often uncomfortable. Babies are often uncomfortable. It's just that the still face paradigm confronts us with it. And in real life, we often miss it, or we think it doesn't matter, or we ignore it. So here's an uncomfortable example. Babies in childcare settings, if you don't have a ratio of carers to babies that's high enough, babies will be uncomfortable often. And the childcare staff will miss that because they're involved in doing other things. And so that means that babies' experiences in childcare settings are shaping them psychobiologically. And often our childcare systems don't think about that. Policymakers don't know that. And so we don't create policy that would pay attention to that need. So when people say to me, I'm really uncomfortable seeing the still face paradigm, I try to help us to think that it just makes us see what we often miss. And therefore, we need to step into the discomfort of realizing this. Understanding all this connection science is both empowering and inspiring and gives us hope, but it also means we have to face some uncomfortable stuff. And so that's why I celebrate anybody who is willing to step into the discomfort and finds other ways to cycle that information out to people who don't know it. So that's why it's exciting to have Ed here, who lots of people won't remember that Ed Tronick was one of the founders of that paradigm, and yet here he is this morning. So it helps to bring it alive. So Ed, thank you for telling us the history of that.
Sure.
And Claudia, here we are in this new world now of pandemic right across the globe, where we've got babies in prams, in strollers, and we're all wearing masks. Or if you follow the advice, we should be wearing masks to protect ourselves and to protect others. Is that making this whole process more and more difficult? Are you seeing things when parents come into to your surgery, for instance? Are you seeing the effects of what this new world is doing to youngsters and to parents?
I'm so glad you raised that question. So I see all my patients on Zoom. But I think but Ed and I have had a lot of back and forth conversations about this question of masks, which people have raised. And I think, first of all, the science is that masks will save our lives. And so I think this is just a reality. And I think that babies get when people feel calm or people feel fear. And as long as adults convey the sense that this is kind of the new norm and this is what we do, that part will be sensed by babies and children because they're very aware and attuned to our emotional state. So I think that's so much more important than whether or not we have a mask on. And in fact, I think it's really helpful for us to get past that worry. And I had this very poignant interaction with a colleague who's a newborn hospitalist. So that's her job, is to go in and work with parents. And she was so distraught about the mask wearing until another more experienced colleague of ours said, maybe what you're really distraught about is the tremendous feeling of loss that goes along with this pandemic. The loss of the easy interaction we have with each other, the ability to touch each other. And we're kind of funneling that into this very concrete question about the mask. But really the question is really metabolizing the loss and then moving past the loss and recognizing that we have the sound of our voice. We have, there's so much more to our communication than just the lower half of the face. And in fact, when people may have heard this expression, smiling eyes, really the muscles around your eyes are in some ways more important than the muscles around your face in conveying your emotional state. So I would hope that people can get past that fear that the mask itself is somehow going to cause harm.
So it's about being as adaptable as we can in whatever the future is going to look like, and maybe thinking a little bit out of the box. Is that what the pandemic has caused us to do, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Way outside of the box. And it's provided us with so much opportunity to practice this concept of mismatch and repair and growth, because things are so messy and so problematic, but yet, I've seen just incredible, powerful interactions with people in the virtual setting. Once we kind of accept, again, we have to kind of move through the loss and grieve the loss, and then we can say, okay, well, this is where we are, and this is our new reality, and how can we find meaningful connection within that new reality?
Ed, in terms of rupture and repair, do you find, and actually for you as well, Claudia, but Ed, just for a second, do people get this? Because what you talk about in the book, a lot of it seems to me to be common sense, but for some people it will be a new concept. Do people get it? Do they understand it, and do they apply it?
Well, we could ask everyone who's watching now, maybe we could take a little quick survey and have people say, yes, I get it, or no, 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 I don't. The still face experiment is, in a sense, a rupture repair model. And I didn't have the idea of rupture and repair when I first did the still face. But where I came to the idea of rupture and repair, or mismatch and matching and repair back to matching, was when I was looking, which is what Suzanne was talking about. I was looking at just regular face-to-face interactions going on between parents and their infants and young children. And the model, I think, that a lot of parents have, a model that's still around, is that the interaction, your relationship with someone should be perfectly smooth. It should be a wonderful dance. And when I went into the looking at the interactions between mothers and infants with that model. And all of a sudden I'm looking at the data, and the data doesn't make sense at all in terms of that model, because what I saw were the really long, frequent periods in which the infant is doing one thing, looking off to the side, or looking at their shoe, or doing, reaching for something, and the parent is trying to get the infant's attention, or the infant's looking at the parent and the parent is, adjusting the strap or fixing the buttons on their shirt, or, wiping the drool that the baby is doing. So they're not engaged in doing the same thing at the same time. And on average, what I saw was that about 70% of the time, parents and infants in what would be seen as really good, typical interactions were in mismatching states. But they would go from a mismatching state to a matching state, and then they'd go into another mismatching state, and they move between these states all the time. So in our regular ongoing interactions, they're filled with mismatches. These mismatches are really small, they're a couple of seconds, or they're 5 seconds long, and then there's a repair, and then there's another mismatch. So you're just going back and forth in this, even though if you were watching the interaction or watch any interaction, it looks like a wonderful exchange going on. And it is a wonderful exchange. But at the micro level, at the very second by second level, you're seeing this, what Claudia and I like to call it in terms of this messiness, this mismatching going on.
And it's really important to remember that although we are talking about babies here, the understanding of this came out of baby work. But this is human beings, no matter what your age. So the implications of this for people in care homes is massive. And we've had so much discussion about what has happened for people in care homes when they can't see their loved ones during this pandemic. The implications for couples, for people trying to do average marriages, this is massive. For people trying to figure out how to do romance, this is massive. For adolescents trying to figure out how to do friendships, and 8-year-olds trying to figure out how to do friendships. Rupture, repair, match, mismatch, whatever language we use, understanding this cycle is crucial for all of those relationships. Mm-hmm. And I love that we've had new language today. When I talk about it, I tend to use the language of rupture repair. Hearing other language like match and mismatch lets us all play with what language do I think helps get this idea across to other people. And that's crucial for the public really getting your heads around this. And Gary, when we were talking just before this morning, you were talking about how your work with businesses is mostly about people in conflict with each other. So business would really benefit from understanding the rupture repair cycle, even though, it's often not in any of their language or culture. And if you think that's just about babies, then we miss the point. Babies are human babies. They're not Martian babies. And these key human processes and capacities, babies are born with. They don't acquire them later. They become more complex, but they're born with those capacities. And that changes our fundamental understanding of what it means to be a human being, which is why the 1970s was so exciting and a really fundamental change in the scientific history.
Well,
Well,
sorry, Ed, go ahead.
I was
Sorry.
just going to say, I remember the 70s really, really quite well. And so maybe my thinking about this is anchored during that period of time. But maybe one of the ways to think about this, since you bring up the example of business, where people have kind of an idea of what it is that should happen. And one of the things we talk about is that you need, in a sense, in part of listening is to give up your agenda, to give up your knowing what it is that should be happening. And if you think about that, if we're interacting with one another, and I know what it is that we should be talking about, and I know what it is that we should be saying to one another, and I know, and I know, and I know, what it does on your side and what it does in the relationship is it just generates mismatches all the time that don't get repaired because I make no adjustment. And you're on your side interacting with me and trying to make a point, trying to say something else, thinking that I'm an idiot or whatever. But all of those things are mismatching because I'm being fixed and unchanging. I have an agenda. And I think I worked and taught pediatricians and physicians for 30 years. And one of the problems of the medical model, one of the reasons why I think often physicians are not effective in listening is that they think, and God bless them, that they have to know what will make this thing correct. And that's what their focus is. And so they don't hear what else is being said. And what they're doing is creating mismatches in a really long mismatches in an ongoing way.
Yeah,
Sorry, yes, Claudia.
Another Ed colleague of mine once said that it's important to be able to consider what way the other person may be right. And we actually use that phrase in the book, but I also want to connect that with the fact that in order to be able to do that and access that place of curiosity, and this it gets back to the idea of what language do we use, it needs to be more than just in our intellect. That this is a bodily experience. Our ability to listen comes from like that little baby I was telling you about, that little 6-month-old before they have words. So that our ability to connect and listen to each other has to be rooted in our own body's regulation. And in the book, we have an example of a couple having a fight over one of them looking at the mail while the other one tells a story about something difficult that happened at work, and how he would go and take a walk around the block before he would be able to then re-engage and listen. So I think that idea of meaning making in the body as well as in words and in your intellect is integrated into the book and into the whole concept of mismatch and repair.
So, Claudia, we know growing up, our teenage years can be some of the most fraught ever as we're going through biological change. Rupture and repair could be used in secondary schools, in high schools then as well, in order for people to rub along a lot better than sometimes they do when teenagers butt heads, as it were.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, well, actually, particularly parents and teenagers often get into a place where they're not able to listen to each other because the conflict is so arousing. And I often say to parents that in those moments, it's as if both their brain and their child's brain has gone offline. So kind of capacities for thinking and empathy that they might have in a more calm state, both the parent and the child, evaporate. And so in order to find their way to reconnection, they need to find a way to engage their higher thinking capacities. And that sort of links back to the question I just answered about bringing that into the body and being able to access that kind of calm and work your way up to a state of regulation where you can listen to each other.
Suzanne,
so Gary, can I come in there?
Absolutely.
That's why there are organizations in the country who have now built body awareness, mindfulness, yoga into the way they operate as organizations. So Tigers is one of those, and I know Pauline Scott, who is the director of Tigers, is with us this morning. I've been watching her comments come in. She also runs Lullaby Lane Nurseries. Children First, which is a third sector organization that works to support children and families, is another organization that puts mindfulness, grounding, breathing at the center of the way they operate. Thrive is another one. I don't know if there's anyone from Thrive here this morning. So when Thrive have their conferences, they begin their events with a 20-minute focusing mindfulness session. Most of the organizations that I work with don't do that. And in fact, they would feel weird doing that. So at our board meeting this morning, at our team meeting this morning, we're going to begin with a 3-minute mindfulness exercise. I mean, Gary, you're even smiling at the idea. Imagine bringing that to the businesses you work with, right? People just feel embarrassed, too obvious, too exposed. Is weird, except that, well, if Pauline were here, she would tell you that it has changed the way her business functions. Children First have put an awareness of trauma at the center of their whole organization. So that's an example of how you put this body awareness that Claudia is talking about at the center of your culture and the way you approach difficulties. Lots of businesses' problems would be solved if they were able to do that.
Ed, here's a $1 million question for you, sir.
Do I get the $1 million?
It's in the post. The check's in the post. What can our world leaders, politicians, learn from this?
The problem I have with the question is, I think things happen at different levels and different levels of organization. At the interpersonal level, the idea that you listen to the other person, the idea that the leaders would, instead of feeling challenged all the time, be willing to listen to the other side, to think, well, maybe there is some kind of point here. And the aim to try and stay calm in the face of what may be stressful interactions. And perhaps the model that I would help, because we have a lot of individuals who could be thought of as infants or infantile, and I won't name anyone around that. But if you think of an infant who gets stressed, who's consumed by being hungry or is crying, is not an infant who's capable of having any kind of engagement with the world. And yet what they need to be doing is to be curious about the world, looking at the world, playing with things. But as soon as they're distressed, they lose that capacity. Maybe they lose their parts of the brain that are the higher parts of the brain that are organizing them. So before you can do anything with the infant, one has to get the infant into a calm and regulated and organized kind of state. And I think in therapeutic settings, that's also what has to be done. That the individual you're working with, yes, they may have bursts of emotion, but in order to work through the issues, they need to calm down and they need to have a sense of what's going on. And certainly for our leaders, high levels of reactivity, high levels of distress are not anything that's going to allow for finding maybe what Suzanne would call connection, or being able to make meaning together, to figure out the kind of compromises. What we see in our country now and other places is people have become so polarized that there's no listening anymore, and everyone's operating it with each other at a very high level of arousal that precludes hearing the other person. And if I can say one other thing, one of the things that happens when you're at a high level of arousal, and think about the infant, and think about what Suzanne said at the beginning about infants and young children really are distressed and they really get disturbed and it really bothers them. When you're really distressed and feeling very disorganized, that things are out of control, that the world is really uncertain, that one of the things you'll do in that state is you shut down and you try to hold on to the organization that you have. And so what you start to do is say, oh, I know what's going on. This is the right thing to do. I'm going to do it this way. Not only is not the higher levels of your brain operating, but you've become rigid and you're no longer listening to what's going on. And there's no possibility of change when you're in that kind of state. You have to move out of that state in order to change and be calmer and not be so distressed. Because what you're afraid of is you're afraid that you're going to get totally disorganized. Melanie Klein, pioneer in psychoanalytic theory, said, the infant, and I think adults, when they get really disorganized, fears annihilation, that you're literally going to disappear. And so what you do is you do everything to shut down that feeling, which means shutting out everyone else. Whereas what you really should be doing is reaching for the other person.
Or in my terms, you're afraid you're going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger.
Exactly.
So you go into your saber-toothed tiger system,
mm-hmm.
and I'm just helping us to all make this link, because a number of you are here this morning will have followed that language. That's a physiological reaction to stress. So not feeling connected to other people and having an intense experience of not being heard. The more you get aroused, you have to go into a place of self-protection. Mm-hmm. And you might go into fight or flight, but if it gets really scared and you're really afraid of being annihilated, you go into freeze. You just start to fall apart. And that's because you're afraid you're going to die, because you're going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. Mm-hmm. And so when people understand that, parents can tune in to their babies and their children, and people can tune into other people in a new way. It helps us to step into curiosity. And lots of you have now got stories about how understanding that has helped you to step into curiosity, rather than shut down more yourselves, or rather than get angry that you are not being heard. Mm-hmm. Understanding this stuff that we're talking about this morning is just so hopeful, because it gives us new options. It gives us new ways of making sense of other people's behavior, which is why I love it. And which is why I often start with it.
Claudia, you're getting very animated in America.
Yes, because I want to pick up on the word hopeful and take the word hopeful into the macro sphere.
Yeah.
So, because, I think you talked about making people uncomfortable and getting into that space where we're able to think about this. And one key idea about mismatch and repair is not only that it's okay, but that it's essential, because it's in the repair that you have opportunity for enormous growth. And of course, you know, we're here in the United States. I don't want to talk too much about politics, but there was this wonderful moment where, you know, in the middle of the 2020 Democratic race, presidential race, so much rancor and discord, and then there was this, I think there were 7 of them in this Hollywood squares during the convention, smiling and talking to each other and connecting, and each one of them in their own way contributing a different kind of angle, and it just offers, it's going through that process that was so painful and difficult that leads to this tremendous opportunity for growth and healing in a macro level. And I also just want to add one thing, which is that if you pay attention to the prosody, one of my favorite words, the prosody of voice, when people speak in a way that that people can hear and connect with, and that is so incredibly healing.
Which is why being calm and regulated, because that was one of the other questions, is about parents regulating. When you get to a place where you are calm, you can speak in a calm prosody, to pick up on Claudia's term there. It lets your children hear that you are calm, and then it lets them step back in to a place that has been difficult. So the idea that we come connected in all these different modalities as babies, including voice, is exciting and remarkable and really profound.
You know,
sorry, Ed.
well, I was just going to say, we've developed a new little experiment in which we have mothers interacting with their infants, and one group of mothers hears baby over earphones. They hear positive vocalizations on the part of the infant, you know, the gurgles and the sounds that babies are making. And the other mother hears babies who are crying, and these are cries that are actually from infants. Some of the infants have neurologic problems, so the cries are really very stressful to listen to. Even we who work with them find them stressful. And then, so they're the 2 groups. They listen to these different vocalizations by the infant, and then they come together in face-to-face interaction. And the infants whose mothers have heard the cries themselves get upset and are much more likely to drop out of the procedure. And what seems to be the cue, the information that they're using, is what Claudia talks about in terms of prosody, that there's a higher pitch in the mother's voices who's been stressed. There's less of that prosody, that sing-song kind of vocalizations. And it's not in their facial expressions because we've coded their facial expressions. But the voice, when we analyze it, do computer analysis of it, there's real distinction between the mothers who heard positive vocalizations and the mothers who heard the cry vocalization. And the infants are sensitive such that they get upset and they begin to, in some sense, share the anxiety that their mother has experienced by hearing the cries.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah. And I think this is Suzanne, confirmation as to why we need another series in the fall, in the autumn, because there is just so much more I want to ask, but time, as always, is up against us. At the risk of actually going slightly over time, there was something I did want to talk about, and then we'll just recap on the book. It is about your views, Claudia and Ed, on new media and mobile phones. Increasingly, we are communicating in a faceless world. You know, we're either texting, sometimes we're not using Zoom or Teams or whatever's out there, and, you know, we're emailing. Does that have an effect on the rupture and repair cycle? Does it make it more difficult, Claudia?
I think we are obviously technology is here to stay and a real lifeline for us. So I like to think of it as, what meaning do we make of technology in the context of actual relationships? So when we make sure that we protect time and space for even, it doesn't matter how much time, as long as it is time where we are really present with each other, that the technology and the distraction has a different meaning than if in the context of a relationship where we don't protect time and space for the being fully present with each other. So it's kind of, not that the technology is the problem, but the lack of respect and preserving of face-to-face connection that comes in the face of overuse of technology.
So it's not the technology, it's the person.
It's the relationship and the context of the relationship. And yes.
Ed?
I think it's just what Claudia is saying. It's the information that's being conveyed and the ability to make connection. And maybe we'll need to make some adjustments along the way and learn how to better cope with what's going on. For example, my voice is now slightly out of sync with the picture you're seeing. And that can be disturbing. And so sometimes using the phone is a more effective way to communicate. But if you think of individuals who have sensory limitations, perhaps low vision or blindness or hearing disorders, or people who have palsies of their faces, those people make successful relationships if they develop ways of communicating with other people, even though those ways of communicating are really quite different than is typical in people who don't have the limitation. And there's no reason why the technology that we're using now and the technology that people are engaged in can't convey what we want to convey, that sense of connection, that caring about that other person, being able to listen to the other person. Sometimes I actually think that being on Zoom or on a phone call gives you more time to listen, because you can just sort of hold off for a bit before you respond. That may or may not be the case, but the phenomenon is the capacity to communicate, to feel curious, and to convey that.
This session, I've got to say, it has been gold dust. I know that we've been getting some really good responses. One final question before I go to Suzanne.
Harry, can I say, you often say that about every single one.
Yeah,
every
I know,
single
but it
episode
is.
you go, I love it.
It is.
I actually think that means that we've had a really good series. And I'm watching the people come in going, how much they've loved the series. They can't believe it's come to an end. So if every single time feels like gold dust, then we have put together good discussions.
And so just going back finally to the book, The Power of Discord, which is out now. And it's on lots of people's reading lists, I'll tell you now, certainly here in the UK. Claudia, same question to Ed as well, but Claudia, if I may come to you first, what is the ultimate thing you want people to take away from this book that you've co-authored with Ed?
Well, even though, as Suzanne said, the book is applicable to all kinds of relationship, as a pediatrician, my main connection is with parents. And I really hope that parents would be kind of freed from the burden of perfection and be able to embrace this idea, the profound idea of the good enough mother, which means not only that it's okay to make mistakes, but that it's essential to make mistakes because of the incredible power of repair in promoting healthy growth and healthy relationships.
And Ed, final word to you, sir. What do you want people to get out of the book?
I think Claudia has said the most important thing, that the repair, that having messiness, that you should almost enjoy a bit of the messiness and not be freaked out about it or worried about it. That out of the messiness and the repair of the messiness, there are really powerful things that happen. One is you create something new, you feel connected to the other person, and your relationship moves forward, and you gain a sense of trust and hope with the other person.
So there you go, Suzanne. Has the past 60 minutes plus been everything you thought it would be?
I love that Karen Law has come in and said, what? That's been 60 minutes. I thought it was 10 minutes. So I think when you're this engaged, it means we're talking about deep, profound things, and that it deepens our ability to be curious about the world. And I love that comes out of these Saturday morning sessions. People go out more curious about themselves and the people around them. I love that.
So we will make plans for the autumn, for the fall. You see, I'm trying to use get some of my American terms in, you see, since we're becoming international. Claudia and Ed, I know it's still early where you are. Have a wonderful day, whatever you're doing, and have a restful weekend, because you both deserve it. What? Hey, who could have believed that? Who could have believed it, that everything was going so well? We were 30 seconds from the end of the broadcast, and then we went into our own version of Rupture and Repair. Who could put money on that?
See, no matter what Claudia said about technology, it still creates these totally unexpected moments. So for anyone watching this video, in real life, the broadcast of our episode on Rupture and Repair stopped there. So we have come back to say goodbye to everybody, but it's really interesting. If you experience just a moment of uncertainty there, if you felt your breath stop, if you felt yourself go all confused with like your eyebrows going like that, that's what babies do. That's what children do. That's what all of us do in a moment of rupture. If you felt it in your body, then actually you have just experienced everything we were talking about today. I would not have wanted that, but given that it's happened, it's a really good illustration of exactly what we've talked about. So now is the time to breathe, and let us now have the transition out. Gary, it's lovely to see you back.
I thought we were doing this at the end of autumn, but anyway, there we go. But we have people that we need to thank, because we've had a fantastic time, you and I, over the past 8 episodes have been fantastic. But it wouldn't have happened without the team. So Brett, who's our ever-suffering producer, Brett, I don't know how you get on with us so much. You should see what goes on behind the scenes. It would be... There's a whole documentary there.
No, Gary, no one should see what goes on behind the scenes. That's behind the scenes.
So, Brett, you're a legend. I take my hat off to you.
Such tension.
You do a great job. And then, of course, we've got Caitlin, who is our wonderful, wonderful social media guru, who puts it all out there while we're live.
It wouldn't have happened without Caitlin to have it nearly circulating so much.
So I know I say that all our episodes are like gold dust, but I genuinely mean it, for the amount of information that comes from them, with the experts that we've had who've got first-hand experience of what we're talking about. And that's all been funneled through you and your work, Suzanne. So that's why I feel somewhat privileged to be doing this, because I learn an awful lot as we're going through it too. How have you felt about the series? I mean, we didn't, if we're honest, we didn't really plan it back in March or April or May. I mean, it sort of happened on the back of the book launch, didn't it? So how do you feel about the past 8 episodes?
I think it's been astounding. So if we just remind everybody, this little book, which you just held up, this thin little book, and I emphasize that because people like that. So Michelle Brennan-Jones said that in the series, and Cara, who works with her at Craig Miller Books for Babies, said that they like that it's them. So the idea that we could have had a summer series that has generated as much insight as you just said it has is kind of remarkable, that in something thin, you can have something with such depth, and that often feels profound. So no, we hadn't planned this at all. This was entirely organic. It came from what people told us they wanted. And that gives me great comfort because my whole aim is just to help people to understand the science of connection. And what this summer has taught me, once again, is that people want to know this. So yeah, I'm kind of with you. Should we do it again? You've been talking to me about this for weeks. So yeah, Gary, I think we should do another series.
That's great news. That's music to my ears. And I've got to say thank you to all our guests who've been superb, willing, very generous with their time, really generous with their thoughts. But the other thing, and I think the final thanks, is to the audience, is to the people that have viewed this either live or recorded, because they have come back week after week after week after week. And we've seen that the audience has been growing and growing and growing. So I think there is an appetite for series 2, as much as I do have a tongue-in-cheek attitude about that. But I think there's a real appetite for it. So yeah, I think we've said all our thank yous, and we've managed to, I think, are we repairing the rupture now? Is this what's happening?
I hope that this will feel like a repaired rupture, even though the people watching the video will only have had a teeny rupture. There's lots of viewers out there as we record this who are still recovering from that sudden break. It just really helps us to get it.
And also thank you to the whole Connected Baby team who make this possible, because there are people behind the scenes that are taking these out of boxes and packing them and sending them to you directly. But there's been a lot happened over the summer. So yeah, here's to the autumn series.
Oh, and so given that Teddy started us, I think if we have the Teddies come back at the end, we'll see you all in the autumn. Thank you so much for being with us. Bye, everybody.
Bye.